A storm rages through the night. A hospital stands silent until the doors slide open. A soaked, battered German shepherd walks in, carrying a tiny, fragile bundle in its jaws. What happens next will shock you. A race against time. A desperate mother's secret. A dark figure lurking in the shadows. Who is the baby? Why did the dog bring him here? And what terrible danger is coming? Stay until the end for a story of loyalty, courage, and survival. If this story moves you, hit like and subscribe for more gripping real-life stories. The Fateful Night. It started with a storm, but ended with a miracle. The rain poured relentlessly over the city, hammering against the pavement like an unrelenting drum. The sky was a battlefield, flashes of lightning ripping through the darkness, followed closely by the low, menacing growl of thunder. Inside St. Andrew's Hospital, the graveyard shift was dragging on. Nurses whispered over steaming coffee cups, their tired eyes glancing at the clock, counting down the minutes until dawn. Dr. Ethan Brooks, the attending physician that night, leaned against the counter, scanning the ER, empty for once. "Quiet night," he muttered. Nurse Olivia Carter, standing beside him, shot him a sharp look. "You know that's the quickest way to jinx it, right?" she warned. Ethan smirked, unconcerned. But then, the doors slid open, and everything changed. A gust of cold air rushed into the ER, sending a shiver down Olivia's spine. She turned instinctively toward the entrance. For a moment, all she saw was darkness, until something stepped inside. A dog, a massive German shepherd, drenched from the rain, matted with dirt and mud. It stood stock still in the doorway, panting heavily, rainwater dripping from its soaked fur onto the pristine hospital floor. Olivia's breath hitched. Something about it felt off. The dog wasn't lost. It wasn't afraid. It was here for a reason. And then she saw it. A bundle, a torn, filthy cloth clutched carefully in the dog's jaws. She froze. The air in the ER seemed to thin, the distant beeping of machines fading into nothing. Then, the bundle moved. Olivia's heart stopped, number. It couldn't be. She took a step forward, slow and careful, her body moving before her brain could catch up. The German shepherd stood perfectly still, his dark eyes locked onto hers. Something deep inside her told her whatever was in that bundle was alive. She swallowed hard, forcing herself closer. The dog didn't move, didn't flinch, and then, in one deliberate motion, it lowered the bundle to the floor. Olivia knelt, hands trembling as she reached for the fabric. It was wet, frayed, stained with something dark. She peeled back the cloth and nearly screamed. A baby, pale, tiny, unmoving. For a moment, Olivia couldn't breathe. Her training kicked in, but her heart was slamming against her ribs, her mind racing. The baby wasn't crying. Oh God, is it too late? Her fingers flew to the infant's neck, searching for a pulse. A heartbeat, weak, slow. But there, her instincts roared to life. "I need help!" The room erupted into chaos. Doctors and nurses snapped into action. A gurney rolled in, and in seconds the baby was lifted, surrounded by a flurry of hands and medical equipment. "Get oxygen ready! We need warming blankets, now!" "Ethan, I don't think he's breathing right. His temperature is dangerously low. He's in hypothermic shock." Monitors screamed, machines whirred to life, voices shouted over each other. And still, the dog did not move. He stood by the entrance, watching, waiting. His mission wasn't done yet. Olivia turned to him, chest heaving, heart pounding, 1,000 questions screaming in her head. Where did you come from? Where did you find him? Whose child is this? But the biggest question of all, how the hell did you know to bring him here? She looked into those deep, knowing eyes, and she realized this dog knew everything. But the only way to get answers was to follow him. The silent witness. The storm outside showed no signs of stopping. Lightning slashed through the sky, illuminating the wet streets for brief, eerie moments before darkness swallowed everything again. The relentless rain pounded the pavement, as if the world itself was trying to wash away a terrible secret. But inside St. Andrew's Hospital, no one was thinking about the storm anymore. All eyes were on the baby and the dog that had delivered him. The hospital in chaos. "We need a full workup. Now!" Dr. Ethan Brooks barked orders, his voice cutting through the noise. Nurses scrambled, hooking up monitors, preparing IVs, carefully attaching tiny sensors to the infant's frail body. The machines beeped weakly, mirroring the slow, shallow rhythm of his breathing. His heart rate is dangerously low. His oxygen saturation is at 60%. That's not enough. "We need to intubate, now!" A tube was carefully inserted into the baby's tiny mouth. Olivia Carter held her breath, watching as a ventilator kicked in, forcing life-saving oxygen into his fragile lungs. For a moment, the world stood still. Then, the monitor's beeping stabilized. A collective exhale rippled through the room. For now, the baby was alive, but no one relaxed, because no one knew how long he would last. And then there was the dog, the German shepherd, still soaking wet, still silent, still standing at the entrance of the ER, watching, waiting. A specter of the storm, a messenger carrying a secret no one could understand. And Olivia knew this dog wasn't leaving until someone listened. The arrival of the police. 10 minutes later, the doors of the ER swung open again. This time it wasn't a dog. It was the police. Officer Jack Daniels, a veteran cop with sharp eyes and a sixth sense for trouble, stepped inside, shaking the rain from his coat. His partner, Officer Kyle Mercer, followed close behind, scanning the room with a wary look. "All right, someone tell me why I got called out here at 3 a.m. because of a dog." Jack's voice was gruff but steady, the kind of tone that said he'd seen just about everything. Olivia turned, pointing directly at the German shepherd. "Because that dog just saved a baby's life." Jack frowned. His gaze shifted to the soaked, mud-covered dog, then to the fragile baby now lying under layers of heated blankets. Kyle let out a low whistle. "You're telling me that dog brought a kid in here?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you." Olivia crossed her arms. "And I think he's trying to tell us something." Jack sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "All right, first things first. Does the dog have a chip?" Kyle pulled out a handheld scanner, crouching slightly as he approached the dog. The moment the scanner beeped, the German shepherd took a step back, ears perking up, muscles tensing. "Whoa, easy, buddy," Kyle murmured. But something was wrong. The dog wasn't just being cautious. He was defensive, as if he didn't trust them. Jack narrowed his eyes. "This dog is trained." Kyle checked the scanner. His face twisted in confusion. "No chip." Jack muttered a curse. "That's impossible. A dog like this? He was owned, trained, maybe even military or police. But he has no identification," Kyle exhaled, "which means someone didn't want him to be found." The room fell into silence. Then Olivia spoke. "We need to follow him." Jack looked at her, skeptical. "Follow him where?" She turned her gaze to the dog. "He knows where that baby came from." Jack hesitated, but then, as if on cue, the dog turned toward the door and walked out. The chase through the storm. Jack cursed again. "All right, Mercer, let's move." They followed the dog outside, stepping into the relentless downpour. The rain soaked them instantly, the cold slicing through their uniforms. Their boots splashed against the pavement as they hurried after the German shepherd, who was already moving with purpose, his paws hitting the wet ground in measured, deliberate steps. He wasn't lost. He wasn't wandering. He knew exactly where he was going. Jack and Kyle followed him through dark alleys, past abandoned buildings, across silent intersections. The farther they went, the worse the city became. Graffiti-covered walls, shattered streetlights. They were heading into the wrong part of town. Jack's instinct screamed at him. "Something's off," he muttered to Kyle. "You don't say," Kyle muttered back, one hand resting near his gun. The dog turned a corner and stopped. Jack and Kyle slowed their pace. The German shepherd was standing in front of a house. Not just any house, a wreck. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. Windows shattered, front door slightly ajar, its hinges barely hanging on. Jack pulled out his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the rotting porch, the peeling paint, the trash littering the yard. Jesus, Kyle murmured. What the hell happened here? Jack stepped forward. Only one way to find out. Hand on his gun, he pushed the door open. It creaked loudly. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mold, damp wood, and something else. Something worse. Kyle moved in beside him, gun raised. Then, a low growl. Jack froze. It wasn't the German shepherd, it was something else. A shadow shifted in the back of the room. Then came the unmistakable sound of movement. Someone was here, and they weren't alone. Jack lifted his gun. Police! Show yourself! A tense silence. Then, a sudden crash, and the sound of footsteps, running. Jack didn't hesitate. Go! Kyle bolted after the noise, chasing it into the darkness. Jack turned to the dog. The German shepherd wasn't looking at the fleeing figure. He was looking at something else. Jack followed his gaze, and his stomach dropped, because in the corner of the room, near a dusty, abandoned crib, lay a tattered envelope. Jack stepped forward slowly, heart pounding. He picked it up, flipped it open. Inside was a handwritten letter, the ink smudged, the words shaky. It read, I can't do this anymore. I have nothing left. My son deserves a chance. Rex, I know you'll take care of him. I trust you more than anyone. Please don't let him die. I'm sorry. There was no signature. Jack exhaled slowly, eyes darkening. We need to find this woman. Now. And beside him, the German shepherd sat down, his eyes never leaving the crib. His mission, far from over. The truth in the shadows. Some missions end with a hero's return. Others end in darkness. The chase into the unknown. Kyle bolted through the wreckage of the house, his flashlight bouncing wildly as he pursued the fleeing figure. The air inside was thick with the stench of mildew and decay, but all he could focus on was the sound of footsteps pounding against the floorboards ahead of him. Stop, he shouted. The shadow didn't stop. It lunged through a broken door in the back of the house, disappearing into the storm outside. Kyle pushed harder, shoving through the busted doorway into a dark alley, his gun raised, heart slamming against his ribs. Lightning flashed. For the briefest moment, he saw them. A figure in ragged clothes, soaking wet, staggering away into the rain. A woman. Kyle's breath hitched. Is that? The woman stumbled, her legs buckling beneath her. She collapsed onto the pavement, curling into herself. Kyle didn't hesitate. He holstered his gun and ran. By the time he reached her, she was gasping for air, clutching her thin arms around herself like she was trying to hold her body together. Kyle crouched beside her. Ma'am, can you hear me? The woman lifted her head slightly, blinking through the rain. Her face was gaunt, her eyes sunken with exhaustion. Her lips moved, but at first no sound came. Then, Noah. Kyle froze. That name. The baby. Jack came skidding to a halt beside him, Rex right at his heels. Kyle looked up, his voice barely a whisper. It's her. The mother's desperate plea. The woman was barely conscious as they loaded her into the patrol car. Her body trembled violently, her skin cold to the touch. She was fading fast. Jack floored the gas pedal, racing back to the hospital. Stay with us, Kyle urged, his voice low but firm. What's your name? She swallowed hard. Her voice was so faint they almost didn't hear her. Emily. Jack's knuckles tightened around the wheel. Kyle leaned in. Emily, listen to me. We found your son. He's alive. He's at the hospital. But we need to know, what happened? Emily flinched, like the question physically hurt. Her lips trembled. She turned away. Kyle wasn't giving up. Emily. His voice was gentle but urgent. We found Rex too. The moment he said the name, something in her snapped. Her whole body tensed and suddenly she was sobbing, uncontrollably. She buried her face in her hands, her entire frame shaking. She gasped between tears. I thought I had no choice. Kyle's gut twisted. No choice! Emily let out a shaky breath. And then the truth spilled out. A mother's darkest secret. Emily had once had a home. She'd once had a husband and a family, until the day it all fell apart. Her husband, Nathan Carter, had been loving, at first, but then came the drinking, then came the rage, and then came the violence. I thought I could handle it, Emily whispered. I thought if I just stayed quiet, if I just survived, it would get better. But it didn't. And when she got pregnant, the abuse only got worse. Nathan didn't want a baby, but Emily did. So one night she ran. She took what little she had, and Rex, the only protector she had left, and disappeared. For months she lived on the streets, doing whatever she could to keep her baby alive. But then, the money ran out. Emily's hands clenched into tight fists. We had nothing left. No food, no shelter. I hadn't eaten in days. She let out a hollow laugh. I could barely even stand up anymore. But Noah, he was still breathing. And Rex, he wouldn't leave me. Tears rolled down her hollow cheeks. I looked at Rex and I told him to take Noah, to find help. Jack exchanged a stunned glance with Kyle. You trusted a dog to save your baby? Kyle murmured, half in awe, half in disbelief. Emily gave a broken nod. He was all I had left. The nightmare isn't over. Jack turned back to the road, jaw tightening, but something was bothering him. Emily had said she ran from her husband, that she escaped, but there was something missing, something she wasn't telling them. Then, the radio crackled. Dispatch to Officer Daniels. Jack grabbed the radio. Go ahead. A pause, then, we've got a situation. Jack's stomach dropped. What kind of situation? The dispatcher hesitated. Then, there's a man at the hospital. Jack's knuckles turned white around the steering wheel. He's asking about a baby. Kyle's eyes snapped to Emily, who had gone deathly still. Her breath hitched. Her entire body went rigid. Then, she whispered two words that sent ice through Jack's veins. It's him. Jack slammed the gas. They weren't just racing to save Emily now. They were racing against a monster, and he was already there. The final stand. Some missions end in victory, others end in blood. The race against a monster. Jack slammed his foot on the gas, the tires screeching against the wet pavement. How the hell did he find them? Kyle shouted, gripping the dashboard as the squad car skidded around a corner. Emily sat in the back seat, paralyzed with fear, her hands shaking so hard they barely clutched her seatbelt. Jack's jaw clenched. He's been looking, and somehow he knew where to go. Kyle's radio crackled again. Officer Daniels, the man is getting aggressive. He's demanding to see the child. Jack lifted the radio. Do not let him near the baby. Do you hear me? Static. Then, we're trying, but a crash came through the speakers. A scream. The line went dead. Jack and Kyle's eyes met. Then, the hospital was in sight. Jack didn't slow down. He floored it into the parking lot. Tires screeching, sirens wailing. The second the car stopped, Rex lunged forward, barking furiously. He knew. Jack threw open the door, and Rex was off like a bullet, tearing through the rain toward the hospital entrance. Kyle bolted after him. Jack turned to Emily. Stay in the car. Lock the doors. Do not move. She nodded, clutching herself, her whole body shaking. Then Jack drew his gun and ran. The hospital under siege inside, chaos had erupted. A man stood in the center of the ER, soaking wet, fists clenched, his wild eyes darting from nurse to nurse. Nathan Carter. His presence radiated danger. A tipped-over chair lay in front of him. A nurse huddled behind the counter, her face pale with terror. Where is he? Where is my son? Nathan bellowed, his voice raw and violent. He turned on a nurse, Olivia. She stood firm, blocking the entrance to the pediatric unit. Her voice was calm but unwavering. Sir, you need to leave. Nathan moved toward her. Jack's voice cut through the room like a gunshot. Freeze! Police! Hands where I can see him! Nathan whipped around, and for the first time Jack saw it. The look in his eyes. It wasn't fear, it was rage. A man who didn't care about consequences. A man who would burn the world down before letting go. Jack stepped forward, gun raised. This ends here. Walk away. Nathan laughed, a cold, twisted laugh. You think I'm scared of you, cop? He sneered. Then he reached into his jacket. Jack's finger tightened on the trigger. Then a blur of fur, a snarl, a beast unleashed. Rex launched himself at Nathan, jaws snapping down on his arm. Nathan screamed, staggering backward as the dog dragged him down. Tables crashed. Papers flew. Jack and Kyle rushed in, pinning Nathan to the floor. Handcuffs snapped shut. Nathan thrashed, but it was over. Jack stood, chest heaving, rainwater still dripping from his jacket. Kyle exhaled hard. Jesus! Then, a soft sound. Jack turned and saw Emily standing in the entrance, her eyes locked on Nathan, the man who had stolen everything from her, who had haunted her for years, who was now on the ground, powerless. Nathan's gaze met hers, and for the first time she saw something new in his eyes. Fear. Emily stepped forward, not trembling, not cowering. For the first time, she wasn't afraid anymore. She met his gaze, and she said one word. Goodbye. Nathan's face twisted in rage. But it didn't matter, because he was done, and Emily was free. A new beginning. The nightmare was over. Nathan Carter was behind bars. Noah had survived. And Emily, she finally had a future. The hospital helped her find a home. The community rallied behind her. She got a job, a fresh start. But through it all, Rex never left her side. The dog who had saved her son, who had brought him to safety when the world had turned its back. 1 month later, Emily stood at the door of her new apartment. Noah was sleeping in the crib beside her. She looked down at Rex, now clean, healthy, his golden eyes calm. She knelt beside him, stroking his fur. You saved us, she whispered. Rex looked at her and wagged his tail. Epilogue, a silent protector. Months passed. Emily had rebuilt her life, but some nights when the wind howled through the streets, she would wake up, and she would find Rex sitting by the door, ears perked, watching, waiting, protecting. Because some missions, they never end. The end. Final reflection. This story isn't just about a heroic dog. It's about resilience, strength, second chances, and above all, it's about the idea that even in our darkest moments, when all seems lost, someone, somewhere, is fighting for us. Maybe it's a person, maybe it's a dog, maybe it's just hope itself. But it's there, and it always will be.